over this, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you guys aren't watching these recordings either. Trust me, I got no pride in having to wear this stupid thing. It's like wearing a scarf around my neck, and I'm not a scarf kind of guy. Um, huh? An ascot, you know, or a neck brace or something. So that's another thing. If this is recording thing isn't something that you guys are watching or whatever, I'm happy to stop it. We don't need to keep doing it. Just trying to add. This is the first semester I've done this, trying to add a resource to the mix here, but maybe it's not worth our effort. Okay. All right. So let's just go ahead then, and let's take a look at this first one. And this first one, managerial accounting, is different from financial accounting. And that managerial accounting has a lot more projections, etc. They say. Okay, I think I had this question as one of the class questions as well that we used, just because I think it's a stupid question, and I think that there's a chance that you might see that on your midterm on Monday, and so I want to get stupid questions out of the way through the practice midterms, and since I'm able to. When we give quizzes, I think what the other teachers do is they have Connect randomly select questions from the test bank for their quiz. And there's always a chance that Connect will select some of the questions that end up on the quiz. So I do that on purpose when I go through, and I don't do the random thing. I select the questions out of Connect that looks similar to your test questions, but when I see a test question that I think is stupid, I go ahead and include that one so you've dealt with that stupidity before the exam. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one. Which of the following items does not represent a difference between financial and managerial accounting? And what? Managerial accounting does not use financial information from the accounting system. Obviously it does. We've been dealing with debits and credits, right? Huh? On the Scantron, no. The answer is D. And on the Scantron, I said the answer is D. Number 2? Oh, okay, yeah, so that's one of them, and that's another one. So there's a potential for operator error here on the Scantron. Okay, so you can add that back to your score. Yeah, that should be E, Jarner. The reason being that I usually don't give tests with an E, and so if the answer is the last one, I tend to default to D on that. So the answer to that one is what? D, so you can add 1 to your raw score. Not that it matters. If this was the exam, I wouldn't give that to you. Just kidding. If this was the exam, I'd add that back to your score. Okay? Because I made a mistake on the Scantron, obviously. Okay? Okay, number 3 here, the answer. Let's look at it. Managerial accounting differs from financial accounting in that managerial accounting relied on analyzing and implementing internal decisions, whereas when we're dealing with what? When we're dealing with financial accounting, it's external, right? Okay, good. So we got some of those theoretical ones out of the way. So let's take a look at this number. What should this be now? Number 4. Okay, so for number 4 now, we're looking, and they tell us that O'Hare Sisters Manufacturing uses job costing and applies overhead using a normal costing system and we even bolded here what? Direct labor hours is the allocation base. The period's estimated overhead cost is $400,000. And when I see that, I know that 400,000 is always going to be the numerator, isn't it? Okay. And then they tell me that the estimated direct labor cost is $500,000, estimated hours is 25,000, and if I look at that and I see that we're going to use hours for this, and the estimated hours is what? 25,000 hours. I do the math on that, and I should get what? $16 an hour. C is the answer. Right? Question on that one? Guys, we got a lot of time here to go through these. There's no sense at this point in sitting in silence and saying, I'll figure it out on Thursday, or I'll figure it out Sunday. That's not going to happen. Okay? Okay, good. Let's take a look at this one now. This is going to be number what? 5 is going to leverage off of this set of information. And we want the direct cost. And when we look at our direct costs, we know our direct costs are what? Direct materials and direct labor, right? Okay. So they gave me direct labor as a freebie, didn't they? 6,900. Okay. But when I tried to figure out my direct materials, they weren't quite as generous. They came down and they gave me some information for my materials, and I had to sit here and pretty much figure out what my direct materials were that were used for the period, didn't I? Okay. So I went ahead and I started out with my beginning direct materials. Okay, beginning direct materials were how much? 1,800. Okay, and I'm looking for, remember guys, you should probably figure out what you're looking for. I'm looking for the subtract from direct materials because that's going to be the amount that got issued to work in progress. So I have my beginning direct materials of 1,800. Now I go back up in here, I want the ads, and so I have to figure out how much they purchased, don't I? And when I come back up, do I find how much direct materials were purchased? 4,500 were purchased, so I'm going to have to go ahead and add that 4,500. Now when I do, I sit here and I get a subtotal. And this subtotal is going to sit here and be 4,800. What is it, 6,300? Thank you. Okay, 6,300 is the subtotal. And then I ended up with what? My ending was 1,500, didn't I? Okay. And so if I sit there and I do my little side calculation, I have my 6,300 is my available subtotal minus what? Minus the 1,500 ending balance. 6,300 minus 1,500 gives me 4,800. 4,800 then I know is the subtract from the total available that got me to this provided ending inventory of 1,500. The problem provided that, right? So that must be my direct materials that got used for the period, right? Okay. And so if I take that 4,800 plus they told me that it was what? Direct labor up here was 6,900 for the direct labor. So my direct materials plus my direct labor, we said what, 6,900? Should total to this answer here, number 5. Number 5, the answer is B, 11,700. Question on that one? Okay, guys, again, I gave a financial 101A test last night, and I had several people saying, help, help, I can't figure this, help, something's missing, what's going on? And when I looked at their paper, they were messing around with T accounts, trying to back into amounts up in the T accounts. God did not make T accounts for that sort of an analysis. T accounts are good if they ask you the ending balance and you just sit there and you do your debits and credits. When they start asking you to figure out the beginning balance or the adds or the subtracts for the period, you want to use this thing, okay? If you start trying to T your way through this, you're going to have those T's are going to turn into tears. They're going to end up standing for tears because you're not going to be able to figure this out. Okay? Okay. Any question on this one? Okay, good. Number what? 6 now? Assume that the total production costs incurred for the month were $15,000. What is the cost of jobs completed? Now look, they're sitting there and you had to calculate the 11,700, didn't you? Okay, and then you sit there and they tell you that the total production costs are 15,000. So they're sort of giving you, even though this question never ended up asking you that, but 15,000 minus 11,700 is what? 3,300. Okay, which that means, Kush, that has to be what? Well, yes, it's the amount of overhead that was applied, right? It's got to be. If I've got my direct labor and my direct materials embodied in this 11,700. But the question never asked you that. Okay, they're just saying the total cost of jobs completed was 15,000. Now, if they're telling you that, aren't they in effect telling you what the subtract is supposed to be from work in progress or the add to finished goods, however you want to look at that? When jobs are completed, what do? We transfer them out of work in progress and into finished goods, don't we? Okay? And so you needed to sit there then and analyze your work in progress is the one that I chose to look at. So work in progress is what? Beginning is 4050 and ending is 4500. By the way, guys, be careful because the test questions vary. Sometimes they put the beginning first, sometimes they put the ending first. And when I go through these questions, often I make the mistake because I'm thinking the first number should be the beginning and the last one should be the ending. And then they always give you a choice that will give you what you think is the right answer, making that mistake, right? Okay. So if I'm analyzing work in progress here, the beginning is how much? Beginning work in progress? 4050. Okay, good. And the what? The adds for the period I have to know are what? My total manufacturing costs are the adds to my work in progress, right? What is it? 15,000? That's the sum of my direct materials, direct labor, and my manufacturing overhead applied. So I have a subtotal here of 19,050. With me so far? Okay. Then what? Then they give me up here the ending balance is 4,500, right? They put the ending balance first. So I know I'm going to end up with an ending balance. I'm just going to put it down here of 4,500, I mean. So if I'm going to end up with an ending balance of 4,500, then I've got to figure out the subtract here. And the subtract is the amount that they finished out of work in progress and into finished goods, right? So I do my little side calculation, 19,050 minus what? 4,500 means that I must have subtracted what, 13,800 from my work in progress and sent that off to finished goods?
19,050 minus 14,500 is 14,550.
How much?
14,550.
14,550?
Yeah.
Sorry. 14,550. I think I was looking at the previous one. 14,550, you say? So that means the answer here is what, A? Okay. Question? Okay, good. So maybe the thing that was tricky about that one is this: assume the total production costs were 15,000, and you had trouble realizing that that meant that we're talking about what? We're talking about the direct labor, direct materials, and manufacturing overhead, and maybe you had that problem with that one because they already made you calculate the direct materials. So you're like, huh, what is this 15,000? Okay, if that's the case, the takeaway from this question is what? You've got to get used to, that's why I gave you so many questions, the different ways that they call out the different things that they want you to be aware of, and they're not consistent. They're going to throw little curveballs at you, so that's why you've got to be very, very solid on what we call these different things, right? Okay, so that you can work through that ambiguity that they may put in some of these questions. So this next one is what, number 7? Okay, and so now they want the cost of goods sold, and if I'm going to get the cost of goods sold, I have to analyze what account? Now I have to analyze finished goods, and I'm going to pick up what? I need to figure out what? The subtract from finished goods is going to be the payoff for this question, right? Okay, so again, I go back up, I look at that table, and they give me finished goods. Beginning is 5,250, ending is 6,000, right? Okay, so right? So 5,250, and what's the ending? 6,000. Okay, and I already know from the previous problem that they added what? 14,550 to finished goods. How do I know that? Because they said that was the cost of jobs completed. I subtracted that from work in progress. It goes into finished goods, right? Right? Okay. Okay, so I go ahead and I get a subtotal here. And my subtotal is going to be 19,000 something, huh? 19,800? Thank you. So it's 19,800, and I just have to figure out then the subtract, and I've gotten into the habit to just showing you this little side calculation, because one time one of my students was, well, how'd you come up with that number? And I think I always did this side calculation sort of subconsciously, and so now I'm just showing you that you do this little side calculation, 19,800 minus what? The ending balance of 6,000 gives me 13,800. 13,800 then must be the subtract that got me down to the 600, right? And that subtract out of finished goods is my cost of goods sold, isn't it? So the answer to that one was A. Okay? Okay, good. So then you came and you got done with that one, and we started giving you a little easier one, the estimated overhead. And guys, be careful. allocated and applied are synonymous, and there's some problems that say allocated, some problems that say applied. They really should all say applied, but I'm not in control of which questions they're feeding you on this midterm, and so I need you to be aware of both of them, right? Sometimes it's applied, sometimes it's allocated. And so in this particular case, they said allocated. So how am I going to set that one up? What numbers do I need to pick up here to get my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Huh? 166,500 is the numerator, right? Manufacturing overhead divided by what? The direct labor hours estimated of 50,000, right? Okay, good. And that gives me the answer here, which is for number 8, $3.30, 3 cents. Now, you know, I don't like, there's the answer. This I will never do to you on the test. And if I do, I'm going to give you those points. If I run into a question that I didn't realize did something stupid like that, I'm not going to make you decide over 3 cents one way or the other. I try to make them turn out so that the, you know, right answer and wrong answer are farther away from each other than that. Okay, but that was the correct answer. But B is stupid. Then why? Come on. What are they looking for? For you to have made a mistake on your calculator with rounding or something? I mean, what is this? The rounding class? Okay, I don't care about that. Okay? I don't write all the I get these questions out of the test bank. Now let me ask you a question. Let's say all I changed this to was what is the amount of overhead that should be applied for the period. Can you get that? I give you the same information, but I say what's the amount that should be applied, allocated to the jobs. Go ahead, John. Huh? Say what? The amount that should be applied to the jobs. Oh, is it? Oh. Oh, hello. Okay, so they went ahead and thought of that. Okay. So how am I going to get that? I'm going to take the 3 times what? Times the actual hours of 60,000, right? Isn't that how I apply? So what's that give me? For number 9 here, the answer is going to be what? 199,800? Okay. Question? Okay, good. Well, if you come back up and they tell me that the actual overhead was what? 165. And I know that from that problem number 9 that I had just what? That I had just applied 199 and the actual is what? 165? I have a difference here of 34,800. Okay. And so since my applied, again, applied, allocated are synonymous terms, although I think applied is technically better. Applied, and I have 165,000 actual, then am I over or under applied? Hello? This side of the room? I'm over applied, right? Because I applied more than the actual. Oops. Yeah. So the answer is D here for number 10. This torture can end whenever you want it to. Just say the word. I know how to do these already. You want to continue this? Okay. Okay, good. Number 11. In a job costing, the allocation of overhead will result in a debit to what? Debit work in progress, right? When I apply the overhead. Is the correct answer work debit to work in progress? Yes, it is. So I told you the wrong answer. I marked the wrong answer on the Scantron. So it should have been B, so you can add that to your raw score. Add that to your raw score. I like how everyone's so happy, right? Oh, okay, I got 10 right. I mean, you know. I mean, I know it feels good to add to your score, guys, but, you know, 1 is not going to... If we were 1 point away from this being where I want you to be, we'd be in good shape. Okay? Okay? Okay. Number 11... I mean, not 11. What are we on now? 12. Number 12, when developing an estimated overhead allocation rate, which is the numerator, and it is always what? The estimated cost, right? The estimated cost goes in the numerator. Denominator is always the driver, and it could be a dollar amount, it could be a physical amount like labor hours or something like that, right? Okay, good. Use this information for the next 4 questions. Oh boy. Here we go with what? With some of our activity-based costing. You can see that coming, right? Okay. Now, with the activity-based costing questions, guys, what's going to define your success on these is your willingness to grind through the information. So it's like weightlifting. And if you sit there and you know, only lift 20 pounds all day, and then you come in here and I put a 50-pound weight on the table, I don't care how many times you lifted that 20, you're not going to be able to pick up the 50. So you have to sit there and you have to practice the grinding through aspects of it so that by the time you're in here, you're like, oh, I've done this before. If you sit here and you don't do that, it's like, oh. Okay, so you don't want that. All right, so with the ones that I've given you here, more importantly, the ones that I think I've given you in some of the practice midterms, and take a look at this one now. And they want to know how much of the material handling costs will be allocated to assembly. Okay, so we take a look at our assembly department, and we see that they took up what? 150,000 of the total activity of how much? What's the total activity here for these parts? 200,000 parts is the activity, isn't it? Okay, and materials handling took up what? 150,000 of that? So if I take that 150,000, how much was the cost for materials handling? How much was the cost for materials handling? 100,000 was the cost for materials handling, right? And yes, that is 75%. So I take what? I take 0.75, that gives me 0.75 times what? Times the 100,000, 0.75 times that 100,000 cost for materials handling means that I should have allocated what? 75,000 over here? Okay. And that was number what? 13. That was number 13? Okay, good. Then they say, what is the ABC allocation rate for supervision? And when we look at supervision, we do what? We're using employees. So what do we got? 70 total employees. Okay, and who are they asking us about? Assembly? For supervision, what is the allocation rate for supervision? Okay, so if I'm trying to get the allocation rate for supervision, it's going to be what? It's going to be the 70 employees divided by what? By the cost. And the cost is how much? For the supervision, the cost is 105. I didn't even need to do the math there. They gave me the 70 employees, didn't they? Okay. And so if I take that 105 employees, 70 employees, and I divide it by what? $105,000 of cost. That gives me what here per hour? Per employee, 1,500. That's number 14. Question? So that just wanted the rate per employee, didn't it?
Somehow like divided by 12. They had a 30 employee, right, for the supervision drawing labor.
Huh? Say that again?
Oh, they had a 30 employee. So it's like I can do the way like you do on the last time. So 30 divided by 70, and then
Well, they didn't ask for the assembly department. Now, if they asked me for the assembly department's share, this one didn't ask me for the assembly department. If they asked me for the assembly department's share, then I would go ahead and do what? I would take that 1,500 right here per employee, and I would multiply. I'm not sure he's capable of listening to me explain it to him and you at the same time. So you want to go ahead and explain it to him?
I should have. But okay,
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at number 15 now, right? Okay. And so we say how much of the janitorial cost will be allocated to testing. And so if I start to look at the janitorial cost, I'm going to see that that's based on what? On hours, which is kind of, these people clearly have never been a janitor. I have, okay? This would not be how you would do this. What are the janitors going to do? Sit there and say, okay, yeah, I spent about 5 hours in the assembly department before I had to push my garbage can and my mop over to assembly, and then that was 4 hours? Is that how housekeepers work? Right? You're taking on a huge task there to try to do that. How would you really do this if you were doing this for real? Huh? By what? Well, I could make them write down on their time cards how much time they spend in each department, but housekeepers don't want to do that, huh? Square footage, right? How big is the area that they're covering? To me, seems like a much more easy thing to use. Now, you could get into things, though, and maybe what they're thinking here, I could see kind of how they might want to track by hours, because if I'm cleaning the waiting room at the hospital, trust me, I know, that's much easier than cleaning the surgery rooms after the surgery. Okay? And if you really wanted to get specific, and I'll stop at this point, if it's a hip surgery, I'm going to be in there a lot longer than if it's an appendix operation. Okay? So maybe hours would be reasonable now that I hear myself talk about this, but whatever. The takeaway from this is what? You want to find the appropriate allocation base, right? So maybe hours does make sense. Maybe assembly is not as, doesn't need as much cleaning. Well, they say, yeah, assembly needs more time. Seems like testing might need more time because it would have to be cleaner. Anyway, okay, shut up, John. All right, so what's happening here? If we're trying to get the amount of janitorial costing, we're using what? Hours here. So 2,000 plus 1,000 equals how many? 3,000. So 3,000 is our base, isn't it? Okay. And if 3,000 is our base, and we're sitting there and saying that we spent how much in, who are we doing here? The testing department? So we spent 1,000 hours in the testing. So 1,000 hours times what? And the total cost, you had to look back up there, and for janitorial was 150,000. Okay, so a third of that. What's that give us? 50,000? Choice D? Is that what I gave you for that one? Okay. Okay, good. Then we want to see the total cost that should be allocated to what? Assembly. So now we're getting to this departmental overhead rate, right? Okay, so we sit here and we look at our assembly department, and we're going to have to go through and item by item now go ahead and allocate those costs. So for our materials handling, which we already probably calculated, right, up there somewhere? Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to redo it so we see how this whole thing went. What was the total cost for materials handling? Total cost of materials handling was what? Materials handling total cost was it was 100,000. I understand that we've already figured it out, guys, but I don't want to. I'm going to put the whole solution here for this one. So materials handling equaled 100,000, and we multiplied that by what? By the 150,000. What was it? 150,000. What are they using to allocate this? Parts. Okay. So 150,000 parts being used up by assembly out of the total 200,000. Okay, so I'm just writing this again. I realize we already did it. That gives me what? 0.75 times the 100,000 gives me the 75,000, right? Okay, good. Then I have to go ahead and do the same thing now for supervision. Okay, so I go ahead and for the supervision, and I saw up there that the total cost for supervision is what? How much? 105,000. And I'm going to multiply that by what? By the... Oh no, I don't need the 105,000 here already because I already came up with a rate per, didn't I? So I'm going to just do it a rate per employee. So since I already came up with the rate per employee of what? 1,500, right? Per employee. And then I look up here and the number of employees that are being used in assembly is how much? 30 employees. So 1,500 times the 30 employees is going to give me, what, 45,000? So I got that one for supervision. And then the last one, I hope it's the last one. Oh no, got to do two more, right? Time spent cleaning. Okay. So for the cleaning, we're going to do what? We're going to take the total cleaning cost of 150,000. How much was the total cleaning cost? I'm losing myself here in this problem. 150,000 of cleaning costs. Okay, so it's going to be 150,000 of cleaning costs times, and I have to use how many employees total? Hours total. It's 3,000 hours total, and I'm going to pick up what? 2,000 of those for assembly. So 150,000 times 2,000 divided by 3,000, and that's going to equal what? 100,000? And then I finally get done with this ghastly problem here, dealing with what? Dealing with machining.
Could you just taking what you did earlier from the testing minus that for the total? That would give you the assembly.
I suppose, if you say so.
Okay.
If you want to take the total and subtract off what you said for who?
For testing.
Um, you mean for the janitorial? What do you mean?
We figured out that it was 50,000 total cost for the testing department for janitorial. And it's a total of 150,000. So 50 minus the 150,000 gives you the 100,000 that you just gave me on the total.
I suppose if you want to get yourself into that, I think you're asking for trouble. Okay, because you're going to be doing it for one versus the other, because this problem went back and forth between testing and assembly and materials versus janitorial. And if the light goes on that you're seeing that and you do that, that's fine, but that's sort of more of a personal test taking thing that happens during the test. I'm showing you how to get the solution every single time with this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, you could have done that for that one for materials handling. Okay. So we got supervision, materials handling, supervision. What was this one? That was supervision?
Janitorial?
No, that was supervision. This one is what? Janitorial now?
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is machining or something?
Machine hours.
Okay, so I'm going to just put machine next to that one. And when you do that one, you note that it is a total of how many machine hours coming up here?
Total hours is 6,000.
Total hours is 6,000. So I got my total hours of 6,000, which I'm going to have as my denominator. How much got used in assembly? 4,000? Okay, times how much in cost?
240,000.
240,000, you say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I take that 240,000, and that gives me what? 160,000? Right? Hello? Okay, so if I add the materials handling plus the supervision plus the janitorial, right? Plus what? Plus the machining. I add all those together, that should give me a total of 380,000.
Mm-hmm.
Does that add up? So 380,000 is choice C here. And that's question what? Question 16. Okay, so that one takes a while, right? This is what I'm talking about, being able to grind through these. And if you don't practice with these and you don't kind of go through that whole thought process yourself, you're going to start to run into problems in the middle of one of these. And you see, even I've done these a million times, and I'm sitting up here, I'm trying to remember, what am I looking for here in the middle of these? So you got to focus, and you got to practice that focus as you go through these, don't you? Okay? Okay, good. One difference between traditional costing system and ABC system is what? And ABC for number 17 has what? More cost pools and more cost drivers, don't they? As we just painfully experienced. Okay. Okay, good. Now this one might have given you some trouble if you got a couple of different concepts confused. Okay. Which they're showing us are manufacturing and non-manufacturing costs, and maybe your instinct was to ignore the non-manufacturing, but if we're getting into break-even analysis now, we're doing cost volume profit analysis, we do consider our non-manufacturing costs because we have to cover those in order to break even, don't we? Okay, so if you look at this one, Poe, is there a question? Huh? No? I saw you racing feverishly. You're okay with this one now? Okay. All right, so what's happening? We're sitting here and we have what? We have this 35,000 manufacturing fixed cost and we have 60,000 non-manufacturing, so we have to consider our total fixed cost here, don't we? To see we're going to break even, right? And then what? We know that our contribution margin per unit times the what? Break-even units, which is what this question is looking for here, has to equal our fixed cost, right? In order for us to break even. So we set that up then, and I always set them up, and sometimes students say, well, why are you going through all that? We know, because you get on the test and then you don't know. Okay, so we go over here and we have our variable cost per unit. And we need to figure out our contribution margin if we're selling this thing for what? 60, and we add together our variable costs, both manufacturing and non-manufacturing, of 25, then that means that my what? Sales price minus my variable cost gives me my contribution margin is what? $35 per unit, right? Okay. So if I have a $35 per unit, 35? 35 or 45? $35 per unit contribution margin per unit times my break-even units has to equal fixed cost of what? 95,000? So if I take that 95,000 now and divide it by my contribution margin per unit, that means my break-even units here are going to be 2714.28. What am I supposed to do with that 0.28? Always round it up, right? You can't sell a 0.28 of a unit. Question? Okay. How about this one? Gene expects sales of 500,000. Total variable costs are 200,000. Total budgeted fixed costs is 180,000. What is the break even in sales dollars? And remember, when we start talking about sales dollars, we're going to use a contribution margin ratio, aren't we? Okay. And so what happens? We have our expected sales are 500,000 minus our variable cost of 200,000 right, Omar, means my contribution margin is how much? 300,000. Good. I take the 300,000. I divide that by the 500,000 sales price, and you're saying I get a contribution margin ratio of 0.6. Good. So now that I have my contribution margin ratio, I'm going to sit there and say, well, if I want the break even in sales dollars, I take the contribution margin ratio times my break even sales dollars, which is what the question's asking me here, going to equal my fixed cost, right? And so I have a contribution margin ratio here of 0.6 times the unknown, the break even sales dollars is going to equal, how much is my fixed cost? 180,000. Good. And then I just do the division, do the algebra on that. So my break even sales is going to equal, Gesundheit, 180,000 times what? I mean, divided by what? 0.6 equals, what's the answer here? Equals what? 300,000? Choice B. And that's question 19. Okay. Okay, good. Number what? 20? And all we're doing here now is a variation on what we just did, but now they're adding in target profit, aren't they? Okay, so all we have to do is add target profit to our fixed costs. So we have sales of $1 million, variable cost of what? 600,000. Okay, so that gives me contribution margin of 400,000. The contribution margin of 400,000 divided by what? No. Divided by sales of 1 million equals 0.4, right? My contribution margin ratio. And then I'm going to just say my contribution margin ratio times my what? And now it's target profit sales is going to equal, has to equal my fixed cost plus my target profit, right? Okay. So my contribution margin ratio is how much here? 0.4. My target profit sales is the unknown in this problem. And that has to equal, and my fixed costs are 200,000. And my what? Target profit is 400,000. Right? Okay. So just doing the math on here then, target profit sales will equal 600,000 divided by 0.4, right? And 600,000 divided by 0.4 is going to give me what? 150,000? I mean 1,500,000? Choice C. Uh-huh. Is there a question in what you just said? Huh? Would you like to articulate that question? What's the question?
I just think that only the CM ratio into target profit is equal to fixed cost. I don't think it's. I just think that it's not the.
Contribution margin ratio times my target profit sales. How much do I have to earn in sales to cover my fixed costs plus a profit, right?
Yeah.
Right? And so what this question is telling me is that if you sell 1,500,000 of items, you're going to have 0.4 of that that's going to first go towards your fixed cost and then your contribution margin, right? I mean, and then your profit, I should say. So my 1,500,000 times 0.4 I know is how much? I know that the 0.4 times. So we're done? I'm trying to see if there's anyone chained to the desk here. I don't think so. I mean, I'm doing this so that you look at these and you're on the test and you get them right. Okay, so what do we got? We've got this 0.4 times 150,000 is how much? 600,000. And remember, we say that our what? Our contribution margin first goes towards our fixed cost and then our profit, right? What's the fixed cost here? Huh? 200,000 is my fixed cost. Okay, so I have a profit of 400,000. Did this thing lie to me? In terms of how much I have to sell to generate a target profit of 400,000? Okay? That's all that's going on here. We're just trying to figure out how much do I sell. And look, first you talk about breaking even, and breaking even is maybe something you're talking about the first couple of years of the business. Well, we can break even if we do this, right? And then you're looking down the road and you're saying, well, I don't want to be in a break-even place forever, but I think that by year 3, we should be able to generate 1.5 million in profits, and that should work. So let's go for this thing, right? Okay. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one. And you need to be ready for a couple that are going to sort of ask you, well, what happens if this piece of the fact pattern changes? Okay? And so I have here expected fixed cost of 91,000, and the projected selling price is $12 per bushel, and the variable costs are $5 per bushel. So my sense is I'm going to first get my contribution margin. Sales price is what? 12 minus the variable cost of what? 5 means I have a contribution margin per unit of $7, right? Okay. And then I'm saying, well, if they're telling me the fixed costs are what? 91,000. But then they argue with themselves and say, well, the fixed costs are going to increase what? 12,000. I just simply add on that increase in fixed cost to the fixed costs that were given to me there. And so that gives me now what? 103,000. And I'm going to set that 103,000 equal to what? $7 times my, what are they asking me for? Units here? Times my break-even units. Solving for break-even units. Divide each side by what? Divide each side by 7. So I'm going to take that 103,000. And divided by what? 7. And that's going to give me this answer, which should be what? No, I'm having trouble with my own numbering system. This is number 21 now? What number is this? 21? Okay. And the one before it was what? 20? I already fixed that? Okay. So 21. And 21, the answer is going to be 14,715. Okay. Okay, good. Did we get some fraction there or no? It came out perfect? So we rounded up? Okay, so make sure when you get these, you always round up. Although I won't give you one that's so close that you'd have to choose between, two close, real close numbers, and that rounding becomes an issue. Okay, so what if I want a pre-tax profit of 37,100? Now this one might have messed you up if you didn't realize, and you could have asked me that we were still sitting here. And if you run into a problem like this, guys, and you don't know which one you should be, which set of facts you should be using, whatever, all you have to do is sit here and do what? Come up and ask me, are we still leveraging off the same set of facts here, right? In fact, I think somebody did come up and ask me that. And so, yes, we're now using this set of facts still, aren't we? Okay, and so we said, well, what happens if we want a profit? So of 37,100. So we take the 37,100, and I don't know who decides to have a profit of 37,100, but anyway, that sounds like a good number I want for my profit. Okay, 37,100, and then we sit here and we take what? We add on, good, the fixed cost of 91,000, and we set that equal to my $7 contribution margin times my break-even units, right? Okay, and so 37,100 plus 91,000 is what, 128,000? And I divide that by my $7 per unit, and that sits there and gets me something in the neighborhood of 18,300. Choice A. Okay, good. All right. Number 21, what if I want a pre-tax profit of 36,000 and the variable cost per bushel drops to $3? Well, now I have to figure out a new contribution margin, don't I? Per unit, $12, and if it drops to $3, $12 minus $3 means I'm going to have what? $9 as my contribution margin per unit. And now I'm going to go ahead and pick up the, what's my fixed cost? 91,000 plus my profit of 36,000. 91 plus 36 is, anybody got a number there? I got it. 127,000. Thank you. 127,000. And I'm going to set that 127,000 now equal to my contribution margin per unit of $9 times my, and I called it break even up here. I should have called it what? Target profit units, right? Because we're not breaking even anymore. Target profit units. I divide each side by the $9, 127,000 divided by the $9 means I have target profit units here, 127,000 divided by should be divided by 9 gives me what? Huh?
14,104 if you round up.
What did I do here? Why are these in dollars and I'm giving you units? Hello. That's the units, but that's not what I wanted here. Hang on a minute, guys. I did this whole calculation for units when the question was asking me what? Dollars. So this 127,000 is still good. And I still had to get the $9 per unit. But what should have I done? I should have did 9 divided by 12. That's my contribution margin ratio, isn't it? I needed the contribution margin ratio here. Let me just put that in red. And so I would have gone ahead and said what? 127,000. My contribution margin ratio is how much? 0.75. Just 9 divided by 12 is 0.75. So I would have said 127,000 times 0.75 times my target profit sales in dollars is what this question was looking for. So I should have used the contribution margin ratio here. And 127,000 divided by 0.75, it's going to give me target profit sales of, now what do I get? It's got to be this 169,000, doesn't it? I mean, if you knew what was going on here, you wouldn't even have had to have done a calculation for that last part because it has to be more than 127, right? Okay. Okay. So, 22, contribution margin ratio, we've seen is the total contribution margin divided by what? Total revenue. How about this one? What is the projected profit at $1.2 million of sales? Now, the way I would have had you set this up is you first want to make sure that you know that the break-even sales is equal to my contribution margin ratio, and that has to equal my fixed cost, doesn't it? Okay. Now you look at this question, and what happens? They give me the break-even sales. They give me the break-even sales at what? Or not break-even sales, but what? We're looking for target profit here. Target profit sales. And they give me the target profit sales. They're telling me that to get a certain profit, you're going to have to generate sales of 1.2 million. And they tell me that I have what? Fixed cost here of 100,000. So it's going to be my job in this particular question to see if I can come up with the okay, now it erased it. It's going to be my job here to see if I can come up with what? The contribution margin ratio. Assuming the computer is going to cooperate with me anytime soon here. And that's a huge assumption. Hit pen again. I think it might be stuck on eraser or something. And then it fixes itself on the funkiest color of all. So I'm going to set that up times my contribution margin ratio. Not sure what the problem is here. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if I can set that one up then. Can I come up with the contribution margin ratio here? And what happens? They're sitting there and they're telling me that my fixed I think it's because I'm near the bottom of this page. They're sitting here and they're telling me that my fixed costs are what? 100,000? And so if I have fixed cost of 100,000 and my break-even sales were what? Were 800,000, that means that my contribution margin ratio times my break-even sales, which is how much? No. Yeah, I'm sorry, my break-even sales of what? 800,000 had to equal 100,000, right? Which is my fixed cost. So if I go ahead and do the math on that, I take the 100,000, I divide that by 800,000. That means that my contribution margin ratio for this problem was 0.125, wasn't it? Okay. So now that I know that my contribution margin ratio is 1.125, that means that if I sit there and I have a profit sales of 1,200,000, and what? And my contribution margin ratio is 0.125. That means that I'm going to sit there and I'm going to get what? 150,000 of contribution margin, and they tell me my fixed costs are how much? Fixed costs are 100,000. So that means that my target profit must be what? Must be my profit must be 50,000. And I think I marked the wrong one on the Scantron for that, or did I? What did I say on the Scantron? 150. It's 50,000.
The target profit sale, and then after that they had like a break even sales. Quite different.
It's 50,000. Yes.
So it's like target profit sale into common uh, contribution margin ratio, right?
I think I wrote this. I wrote this and it didn't. It doesn't help me. It doesn't have to equal 100,000. So ignore this. I should have started what? Really right here. My contribution margin ratio times my break-even sales has to equal my fixed cost, right? They gave me the break-even sales, so I had to figure out the contribution margin ratio. So I just sat there and I said, okay, I just did the math. I divide each side by what? By the 800,000, so that I end up with the contribution margin ratio, right? 0.125, just doing the algebra. So the setup should have started right here. Contribution margin ratio times my break-even sales equals my fixed cost, right? Guys, we've said this 1,000 times now. Contribution margin ratio I'm sorry? Right here, look. Contribution margin ratio, right, times my break-even sales has to equal my fixed cost, right? Right? If I'm sitting there, I'm saying 40% of each sales dollars of each sale dollars, which is my break-even sales, goes towards fixed cost and then profit, and my fixed costs are $400,000, then how much sale do I have to generate to cover a fixed cost of $400,000? You can do that in your head. How much sales do I have to generate to cover fixed costs of $400,000? Well, that would be a million. It's 0.4 is my contribution margin ratio. Right? 0.4 times 1 million equals 400,000, doesn't it? So if I generate, okay, you're overthinking it. Look at me. Don't look at that. You're overthinking it. Look, you know that 0.4 times a million equals 400,000. You know that. Okay, and so all I'm saying is that 0.4 is my contribution margin ratio, means 40 cents of every dollar, 40% of every dollar that I sell goes towards first my fixed cost, and then if I had a profit, that would be in here too, right? Okay, and so I'm just saying 0.4 times break-even sales. If I have $1 million of sales, that'll equal $400,000, won't it? Okay, so all I'm saying is that, where it's not blatantly obvious in our head what the correct number is, you set it up like this. 0.4 times my break-even sales has to equal 400,000, and if you divide each side by 0.4, that equals $1 million, doesn't it? So that's how we get my break-even in sales? In sales dollars? With me on that one? On that little example? Okay. All right. Do we have that example? Hang on. Hug the base that you're on for a minute before you start to run to the next one. Okay, we got that one, right? We're good?
No, you know what? After class, I'd like to go through this with you because I'm not getting it.
Well, I don't understand how you could get this and now you're not ready to go to the next step.
Well, because I don't know how to get to the CMR.
Okay. Contribution margin ratio is simply, and trust me, you're not the only one that's, you say me after like you're holding back people that are, flying into outer space with this concept, and that's not the case. So that's why I'm stopping to do this. Sales price minus my variable cost, equals my contribution margin, right?
Okay, so we have 800 minus.
Stop looking at that problem.
Okay.
Sales price minus variable cost, is my contribution margin, isn't it?
Right.
Okay, and so if I have $100 sales price minus my variable cost of 60, my contribution margin is $40, right? I'm doing it, say, per unit here.
Right.
Okay, and so if I'm sitting here and I take then my contribution margin and I divide it by my sales price, that gives me the contribution margin ratio. That's saying that 40% of each sales dollar contributes first to my fixed cost and then if I have a profit in the calculation, my target profit, right? Okay, so that's all. That's where that 40.4 came from. And then if the problem told you that your fixed costs are 400,000, then you're going to say, well, 0.4 of every sales dollar has to go to my fixed cost. And so you just do the algebra. $1 million in sales, and you can do that in your head, will generate what? Will generate $400,000 to cover my fixed costs, right? And I'll break even at that point? Okay? All right. Now, in this problem, it was a little meaner because they didn't give us the tools to calculate the contribution margin the way we're used to. We couldn't calculate it the way we're used to because they didn't give me what? They didn't give me the variable cost. So I can't get the contribution margin. They gave me the sales, but they didn't give me the variable cost, right? So I can't get the contribution margin. I'm going to get the contribution margin. I'm going to get the contribution ratio. And so what I told, which is what we need to solve this problem. So what I was saying, and where I maybe confused you guys, is I started out up there trying to get my my fixed cost, forgetting that they told me the fixed cost, right? Okay, and so I just sit there and you start with where I circled here, contribution margin ratio, which I don't know. I don't know what it is yet. I'm trying to figure it out. What?
Okay. Can I tell me like an easier way to do this?
Well, you could teach the class if you want to.
No, no, I.
Okay, but you can tell her that after, yeah. You take the 100,000 contribution margin ratio times the 800,000 equals what? Equals 100,000. I don't know what the contribution margin ratio is, but contribution margin ratio times my 800,000, which is my break-even sales, is going to equal my fixed cost here, isn't it? Go ahead. Jarna, go ahead. Tell her the easy way to do it, because I guess I'm not doing it the easy way.
It's just total cost of this would be a break-even sales of 800,000. Oh, so the total cost would be 800,000, right, for break-even sales. So that is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. So that's 100,000 plus X. So in that case, the variable cost is already 700,000. And so, like he said, the sales price minus variable cost, right? So that gives you 100,000 in contribution margin, and if you just divide that by the sales, you get the 0.125. I don't know if that's easier, but it's just another way of gauging this.
Okay, that would be one way to do it. Okay, the way that I'm saying to do it is sit there and I'm trying to go back to what we've already learned instead of creating a new way of doing it for this problem, because I don't know that on your test you're not going to get another problem that asks you something else, and then you're going to have to create a new way to get the answer on that one. Okay, so I'm trying to be a little more systematic, which we know that our contribution margin ratio times our break-even sales. Just look up there at that thing that I wrote for the 400,000. Just look what I wrote up there for the 400,000. My contribution margin ratio times the break-even sales equals my fixed cost, right? And if you look at what I wrote over here, I said contribution margin ratio, which I don't have in this problem. That's the whole problem. And Jarn is trying to give you another way to come up with it. I'm just saying that once I set that up, contribution margin ratio times my break-even sales equals my fixed cost, which they have given me those items, haven't they?
That's times the 8,000.
800,000, yes.
Yeah, 800.
Right, so contribution margin ratio
Times 800,000.
times my break-even sales equals my fixed cost, doesn't it? And if I just do the math now using this formula that we've already worked with, then I'm going to take the 100,000 divided by the 800,000. That's going to give me the contribution margin ratio, right? I'm just doing the algebra here. That gives me the contribution margin ratio, and if I have the contribution margin ratio, now I just take whatever they told me. They're asking me what's the profit if I generate sales of 1.2. If I generate sales of 1.2, that's going to give me $150,000. 100,000 goes towards fixed costs. 50,000 is left for profit, isn't it?
I don't understand how you got that last step. I thought that it was the contribution margin ratio times the target. I'm sorry, contribution margin ratio times the break-even sales equals fixed cost plus target profit. So that's what I was thinking.
Well, if you want to take the contribution margin ratio, and you're saying that that has to equal fixed cost plus target profit,
Yeah, and then
is what you're saying to me?
this break-even.
And you're saying that you agree that we got the 1.25. You're satisfied with how we got that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the 0.125 times 1 million. Okay, what do you want to, I don't, contribution margin ratio times what? Times my,
The break-even sales, I guess, but you already.
well,
No,
why would I
you're
need
right,
break-even
I'm
sales?
confused. You're right.
Times the sales, contribution margin ratio times the sales that I need to generate the profit that I'm trying to figure out in this problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I'm saying that if I take the 1,200,000, which they told me was they're trying to get the profit for those sales, times the contribution margin ratio, 1.25, 0.125, I end up with what? 100 what is it? 150,000, and 150,000,
Subtract the fixed.
then 100,000 goes towards fixed costs, and there's 50,000 left to go towards profit, right?
Yeah.
If I'm sitting here, contribution margin ratio times my break-even sales equals fixed cost, right? Is there anyone who doesn't see that? Because you had to start with that. Okay, if we got that, then we just divide each side by 800,000. That gives me the contribution margin ratio, doesn't it? If I got the contribution margin ratio, I'm home free on this question. Now I multiply it by the sales figure they gave me, and they want to know what's the profit if I do that, right? The profit is 0.125 times 1.2 million. 150,000 is the total. Now this is the contribution margin, isn't it? Maybe that's what I should have said. That gives me the total contribution margin minus the 100,000 gives me 50,000 left over for profit, right? Okay, so this one was a little tougher. Okay, I admit this is a little tougher problem. Now, Jarna, go ahead. Tell me what you wanted to do now. So you said you were going to take the what? The sales of 1.2 million or something?
No, so to find the variable cost,
Uh-huh.
it's 800,000 is equal to 100,000 plus X, right? The variable cost.
So you're saying 800,000, was it 800,000?
Yeah.
800,000 minus the which is the break-even sales. Okay, and then you wanted to take off the fixed cost from that,
Yeah.
which was 100,000. So you're telling me that variable cost equals what? 700,000?
Yeah.
Okay, once you got variable cost of 700,000, then what?
You can get the contribution margin and break even.
Contribution margin is going to be sales price of you're saying 800,000
Yeah.
minus the what? Variable cost of 700,000. I'm writing that again. Well, no, I'm not writing it again. Gives me contribution margin of what?
100,000.
I see. Yeah, I guess that could have worked too for you to get that. I set it up in a algebraic format, but that was consistent with other things that we had looked at. But yeah, then you would go ahead and you'd say 100,000, which is my contribution margin, divided by 800,000, which is my sales, gives me a contribution margin of 1.25.
Yeah.
I mean 0.125, which is pretty smart, yeah, which is a pretty straightforward way of doing it, right? And then you go ahead and you take 1.2 times the sales, then we have what? We have 150,000 of contribution margin that comes out of that, of which 100,000 first goes to fixed cost, and then 50,000 goes to my profit in this question, which is what they were asking for. Okay. And again, the reason I set it up like this is we've already realized that my break-even sales times my contribution margin has to equal my fixed cost. And so if I just do the algebra, I'm given the contribution margin ratio that way as well. Okay, guys, so are we ready to adjourn this thing, or we want to take a break and come back and do some more of these? We got time. No break? Okay. Some people are looking like they've just been run around the merry-go-round here, so that's why I asked. Keep going? How many want to take a break? No? Okay. All right, so we'll keep going then. Okay. All right, good. So, what number was that now? I lost count. 25? Okay. Please.
We are on 26.
20. Let me make sure I got the numbers right. 21. So that was, then we did 22. Okay, the numbers are catching up with themselves. That was 23, right? Number 21 was 23. 22 was 24. 23 was 25. So now we're on 26. Okay, now these questions got a little bit hard because the methods that I had written up here on the board didn't necessarily work for all of these, and this might be why some of these questions got a little confusing for you. Okay, so let's just take a look at these, and we had a equivalent unit for our conversion cost, which this one was asking for, that we had to figure out. And so what happens? With this one, we had to figure out the ending inventory. And I don't know that we did any like that during our homework. Okay? And so to get the ending inventory, they tell us that we had beginning inventory of 900. And then they tell us that there were 8,100 units that were started and 6,800 units that were what? Transferred. And so when we went ahead and added in the 8,100 that we started, and that gave us a subtotal here of 9,000, right? And then we subtracted out the units that got transferred, the 6,800 that got transferred. Then that yielded for us what? We must be left in ending inventory then with 2,200. So that was a little different because before they would give us the ending inventory. Here they gave us what? The units that were started, the units in beginning inventory. And then we had to do what? Subtract out the units that were transferred out to determine what's left in ending inventory here, right? Which was this 2,200. And then once we got that, then it was pretty easy to go back to the way we were doing them for some of our homework problems, etc., which was to simply take these 6,800 units that were what? That were completed and transferred out, and then bring in the equivalent units of ending inventory. Our ending inventory had how many? 2,200? And you took the 2,200 and then you multiplied that times, and what percent done were they for conversion costs? Huh? 0.1? Where was that? Oh, there it is. For ending inventory, Omar, was 10%, you say? Okay, so we were 0.1 complete, so we take the 0.1. 2,200 times 0.1 is what? 220? So if we added the 6,800 plus the 220, that gave us this, where did I write this? How much? 70/20? Okay, so the trick here was you had to get the ending inventory for this one, and that was a little different. So that might have caused some problems too, in that we hadn't really practiced with that. I think that you're going to have to get used to reading these problems maybe a little more critically than what I had originally talked about in terms of just always do these steps right here. You're going to have to read through them and see what it is that they're asking for to come up with the equivalent units. Once you got that 70/20, then it was pretty easy for my what? Oh no, then they wanted the cost per equivalent unit, and they flipped on here and they asked for materials on me, didn't they? So I have to get the equivalent units for material, which again is going to be the 6,800 that were done. But now to get my equivalent units for ending inventory, it's still the 2200, right? But now I have a different percent complete, and for materials, they're what? 60% complete for materials? Okay, so I go ahead and I multiply that by 0.6, and that's going to give me 1320. And so I add those together, and that gives me 8120. Okay, but that was sort of like step one for this question, because then you had to pick up the cost. Okay, and remember that for the weighted average method, we pick up all the cost, don't we? So we pick up the cost in beginning inventory, and we pick up the costs that were added for the period. So we had beginning inventory, 10,800, and we had what? Materials cost added for the period of 80,000. So if I take those two numbers, what was it? 10,000. How much for the beginning? 10,800 plus the 80,000 that was added. That gives me 90,800, and I divide that by 8,120, don't I? My equivalent units. And that gives me a cost per equivalent unit of what, 1118? Okay. So for these two questions, the hard part was dealing with how they made us back into the ending inventory, right? Question? 10,800 was the cost in the beginning inventory. 80,000 was the cost that we added for the period, right? So I just picked up these two numbers. Under the weighted average method, we pick up all the cost for everything for the period, what's in the beginning inventory and what we added for the period. We pick up both those numbers. That's the easy part, guys. Whatever number they give you for beginning plus whatever they added for the period, you always pick that part up. The hard part is going to be to figure out where you should be getting these, what you should be doing with this ending inventory. It's either going to be given to you, or you'll have to calculate it, or they'll give you the number of units that got transferred out, and you'll have to add in the equivalent units, or you may have to figure out the number of units that were transferred out, and they'll give you the ending inventory. So you're going to have to do one of those. Okay? All right, come down. And let's look at this Acalac, or whatever the name of this company is. And they come down, and again, they tell me that they are, all of them are going to always use weighted average. And we have that we start out with 700. They give us the costs associated with that. They tell me that 9,200 units were started and 8,300 units were transferred. So this is again one where I'm going to have to calculate the ending, right? Okay. So what happens? Well, if I have 700 units in beginning inventory, how many units got added for the period? 9,200 got added. And then what? Then I like to get subtotals here of what, 9,900? Just so I kind of make sure I'm keeping track as I go along. And then they transferred out how many? They transferred out 8,300. So I'm going to transfer out those 8,300. So that leaves me in ending inventory with what? 1,300? 1,600? Okay. And once I got this, then it's just like we've been doing, which is what? To figure out the equivalent units, it's those that we completed and transferred out, which is given to me in this problem, which is the 8,300, plus what? What I'm going to give myself credit for having completed an ending inventory. The equivalent units in ending inventory. How many units? 1,600? Times 0.15, just looking back up, you can get the 0.15 by seeing that they tell me that my ending inventory, where are you getting the 0.15, huh? Oh, okay, there it is. So it's what, 15% complete as to conversion cost? And are they asking me for conversion cost here? Yes, they are. So I'm going to take that 1,600 times what? 0.15. 1,600 times 0.15 is what? 1,200? So you take the 8,300 plus the 1,200. What's that give me? 9,500? Huh?
1,600 times 0.15 is 240.
240? Okay, what'd I do? I must have just multiplied times 600, I guess. That's what I did wrong. 0.15 times 600. You notice every time I make a mistake, that's when the eraser decides not to work. There it goes. Okay, so it's what? 240, you say? Maybe if I move it down here. Yeah, if I could write it, I would. Trust me. I would have written it by now and been on to the next question. But since I can't seem to write anything right now. Okay. Okay, so where we're right here. 1,600 times 0.15 is 240. 240. Okay. So 8,300 plus 240 gives me what? How much? 8,540. Okay, so the equivalent units here is 8,540. Did I say the answer was D? Okay. So it's 8,540 is D? Okay. All right, sorry about that. So I think the thing's behaving now. So what happens? We're sitting here and we're 8,300 was the units transferred out plus the equivalent units, 8,540. And then the next question says, what is the cost per equivalent unit for materials now? So I'm going to go through the same exercise for materials. I know that they transferred out what? The 8,300. Just picking that number up, the 8,300. And then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to take the 1,600 units that I calculated for ending inventory. But this time, how much done were they for materials? Thank God it's right there. Times 0.75. And 1,600 times 0.75 is how much? 1200? Maybe I was looking at the wrong problem there when I was doing it. So that's what, 9,500? Which is going to be the, oh, that's part of the answer. That's step one, isn't it? Now that I have the equivalent units. 9,500. And then I always pick up all the costs, don't I? Those in beginning inventory and those that I added for the period. Beginning inventory was 12. They added for the period what? 200,800. So 200,800 plus how much? 12,000. Gives me what? 212,800. And I divide that by what? By the 9,500 units. And that should give me what? How much? 2240. Okay. So again, the only thing that made these different from what we practiced with is they made us back into the ending inventory here, right? Okay. All right, let's take a look at this one. And this one was very similar to some that we did in the practice exam. Okay. So in the practice exam, the earlier practice exam, they gave us this whole big table of numbers, and then we just needed to sit here and figure out, well, what's the equivalent units for what? For materials. And even though this problem looked harder, it was actually easier, wasn't it? Because we just had to pick up what? Units transferred to the next department. They told me, they just come right out and tell me are what? 4,400. So I know that those are gone. And now I just have to do what? Figure out my units in my ending, which is from is the units in ending inventory were how many? 1,500 they told me. So I pick up that 1,500, and what are we looking for? Conversion costs or materials here? For this first one, materials. So how much done was I for materials? 50% done for materials. Oops, 50%, which is actually the same number if I put another zero there. But 50% is, actually, no, that's, yeah, 50% would be the same thing. So what is that? 750. So 4,400 plus 750 is 5,150. Okay. So even though they gave me a lot of information in that table, it actually was easier, wasn't it? Okay. For conversion cost, I do what? I still sit there and pick up the number of units that were transferred. Number of units were transferred were what? 4,400. I know those are done. I'll just write it down here. 4,400. But now I'm going to still pick up the, what were the units that were transferred? 1,500? I mean, not that were transferred, but were in ending inventory, 1,500. But now I've got to pick up this, what? 30%, right? So I take that 1,500 times the 0.3. And when I do, I get this 450. So 4,400 plus 450 is 4,850. Okay. And then to do the cost, I'm going to do what? I'm going to pick up the conversion cost, both that in beginning and that was added for the period, right? So it's going to be 7,800 plus 125,600. 7,800 plus, what I say, 125,800? 600? I add those two together, I get what? 133,400. Do I have a confirmation on that? Okay, 133,400, and I divide that by what? The equivalent units, 4850, and that's going to give me what? What's the answer here? How much? 20, 2751? Oh, what did I have to do with this one? The materials here? Okay, so for the materials, I should have picked up my materials. I thought we did materials already. Okay. For materials, I got 5150 is in my numerator, right? And now I just have to pick up the cost, and not my numerator, my denominator. And then I just have to pick up the cost, and the cost here are for my materials, what? 8,000. If I can do this without driving the computer crazy. 8,000 and what? 90,300? So what's that? 98,300? Divided by 98,300. What's that give me? 1909? Good question. We were on. Let's catch that up. So this one is what? 27, right? '26 is supposed to be 28. 27 is supposed to be 29. 28 is supposed to be 30. 29 is supposed to be 31. 30 is supposed to be 32. 31 is supposed to be what? 33. I have no idea why I wrote 27 here, or that I guess I wrote it, but I don't remember doing that. Okay, which of the following, are we caught up now on numbering? Which of the following statements is true with regard to activity-based costing? What number is this now? 34. Which of the statements is true regarding activity-based costing? And the answer here is that the what? The premise of ABC is that activities are what causes costs to be incurred, and thus we should use those activities to allocate them. Right? All those activities. Which of the following companies would least be best served by plant-wide overhead rate? And it's a company that has few products and whose operations are labor intensive. You can just use what? You can just use your direct labor hours to allocate a plant-wide overhead rate, right? What number is that? 35, we're done? Okay. All right. Now what I would suggest at this point is that you go back through this test. I would go through all the practice exams, every single one of them that are sitting up there. There's a lecture with every single one of them on Canvas. And if there's areas where you're like, I still don't get this, go back to the chapter for what that material came from, and you're going to see a lecture on that, a discussion on that, and other practice midterm questions that are in there, right? Okay. Now, what I want you to do at this point, you can never be in a hurry to leave a class the day before the exam. Okay.